Verification and T's and C's at energia.ie/EAB.
The Off the Ball Open tees off in Abu Dhabi this November 17th to 23rd. Join us with return flights from Dublin, 5 nights in a 4-star hotel, golf on 2 championship courses, gala awards dinner, Peter Lorry golf clinic and a live Off the Ball roadshow, all for just €1,750. Kevin Kilban and Kieran Donaghy will be there too. The Off the Ball Open, Abu Dhabi this November. Book by August 18th to avail of this early bird offer at CassidyTravel.ie. Deposit of €250 required. Terms and conditions apply.
Off the Ball. This is News Talk.
Now you're welcome back. So we're turning to review the Sunday papers. We'll go through the headlines. Firstly, Sun Sport. As you can imagine, the Dubs are dominating. 1 win from history. Second half Blues blitz decides, it says the Sun, and it's a picture of Conor McKeon showing his delight as he nets his first goal for Dublin yesterday. So that's the back page of the Sun. Sunday World again going with the same picture actually. Conor McKeon. O'Callaghan's goal brace triggers Blue Avalanche to see off Mayo. And then Ole rolls the dice on youth. Ole Gunnar Solskjaer here has vowed to place his faith in Manchester United's young stars. He's saying, you can call it a gamble, I'm just staying true to what I believe in, says Solskjaer. Sunday Independent, again it's Conor McKeon. Fist pumping, happy. He's scored the goal, which is going to puncture Mayo hopes. One more game, ... Dublin on the brink of immortality is the Sunday Independent lead. Dublin 3-14, Mayo 1-10 the scoreline. Beneath that then, Pep finds fault despite 5-goal win. That's Pep Guardiola. Not feeling Manchester City were all that good despite the 5-0 win yesterday. And Carbery injury scare. Joe Schmidt says too early to say if Carbery's ankle will affect his World Cup chances. We'll come to that in a few moments' time. Again, it's King Khan. Sunday Times this time. History beckons, very much the theme. Clubs dispatch Mayo to stay on track for unique 5 in a row. And then over here, Jose joins Sky panel. He called nuts. Jose Mourinho is going to be on the Sky Sports panel this afternoon. And Nick Greenslade here goes through his various tiffs with Sky down the years. I'm sure it'll all be forgotten. Mail on Sunday. Brian Fenton this time after his goal. Demolition, the headline. Mayo resistance is ripped asunder by devastating Dublin in a second half display of ruthless power. And then Mark Gallagher here, Clifford concerned for Kerry ahead of Tyrone clash. David Clifford had been suffering with back spasm and he had been past fit to play, had been named in the team. Peter Keane named on Friday, but it seems there's going to be a late fitness test for David Clifford this afternoon. The Star have VAR in red and they reckon it stands for a vast amount of replays. Certainly was a big feature of the game yesterday between West Ham and Man City. It's going to take a while for that to settle down. And then Sunday Mirror, Dubs in the driving seat, 5 in a row chasers get fright and then they get motoring, which is very much the theme of the day. We have Ruaidhri O'Connor here from the Irish Independent and Conor McKeon, who features right across INM, Evening Herald, Irish Independent as well. You were both in Croke Park yesterday?
Yes.
It's where everybody's jumping off. We have, in no particular order, Pat Spillane, Charlie Redmond, Mark O'Shea, Joe Brolly, Colm O'Rourke, Eamon Sweeney and beyond, all talking about this game. Where do you want to start, fellas?
It's hard to avoid Joe Brolly on days like this, so we might as well just kind of go straight to him this morning. He's had a kind of a colourful relationship with Mayo all through the year. I think he wrote them off pretty forcefully earlier on when they were beaten in Killarney. But previous to that, he said they were the most important team in Gaelic football because the theory going into this game yesterday was that they were the only team that could put it up to Dublin because they have done in the past. But he has a go at them here for their surrender yesterday. He says it was total and abject. He said no doubt players will be meeting in club rooms somewhere in the country over the next few weeks to write James Horan's resignation letter. And they will, however, find the excuses to absolve themselves from blame. I mean, it's pretty cutting. And he says the problem with them, and always has been, that the culture in the group, with some honourable exceptions, is wrong. They've celebrated mediocrity and many of them have put themselves before the group and the good of the county. It's a pity because they've had enough good players to win an All-Ireland, just not enough good men.
Take a breath with that line.
Yeah.
It kind of calls back to the Sean Kavanagh line, doesn't it? I mean, it's a little bit unnecessary, to say the least. I think, there's a lot of things that you could, as you analyse the game and the reasons they went out, and there's a lot of reasons why they did. There's a lot of things he could go to. I just don't see their character as being really on the on the horizon.
I think if you go through this Mayo team, like the decade is over, and they've obviously played a huge part in the footballing story of the decade. They've been in 5 All-Ireland finals, including the 16 replay, 8 All-Ireland semi-finals. They've been involved in some of the best games of the decade. And if you go through all those games, there are instances when their own technical failings have let them down, where managerial decisions have let them down, where poor luck. Like I think in my life, I think I've probably seen 5 own goals in a Gaelic football match, and they had 2 in one half of an All-Ireland final. There were situations where they left Keith Higgins on Owen O'Gara with a snapped hamstring in the 2013 final. They had situations where Cillian O'Connor missed a couple of frees into the hill that he would score 100 times out of 100. They had a couple of kickouts that went over the sideline when if they had won it, they'd have won the game. But I'm not sure any of that comes down to character. And like we've stood, I remember standing in the press box after the 16 replay, and as we've had the conversation before with other journalists saying they can never come back from this. How can he get up off the floor? And in 17 they came back and got up off the floor and came closest. It was probably their greatest display because they put Dublin so close.
Yeah.
But the point is, and not just to get off Joe's piece for a second, is that I think it's easier to come back after the crushing disappointment of a 1-point All-Ireland final defeat than it is from yesterday. Yes, they had a feeling of finality about it. They are further away from Sam Maguire than they have been since probably 2011 when James Horan took over, and they'd lost to Longford in 2010. And I think, and there's an awful lot of end of era pieces. Eamon Sweeney is a good piece where he talks about Mayo saying that their legacy is not diminished by virtue of the fact that they didn't win the All Ireland. Now that's an interesting point. Like, is it or isn't it? Like, their legacy as a great sporting story isn't diminished, but as a great team,
it's not enhanced.
Yeah,
it's not diminished, but it's not enhanced either.
There is the feeling of an end of days about this. I think I was in James Horan's press conference yesterday, and he said, "Look, the team will change. There will be natural erosion." I'm paraphrasing him. That's what he said.
Yeah.
And there's guys who are 34, 35 who have put so much into this now that it would be hard to see them come back, because the Mayo thing might be another 2, 3 years until they're still in the top 2 or 3 teams in the country, but they were miles off Dublin yesterday.
It's very striking because they're on the same page as how diametrically opposed Joe Brawley's interpretation of Mayo team's character is with Eamon Sweeney.
Yeah.
Like, it could not be more polar opposite, and Eamon Sweeney's had his attacks on Mayo for years, famously.
Joe's also praised them.
Yeah, Mayo didn't deserve to go out like this, is how he opens it. He says, there was a terrible and cruel finality, says Eamon Sweeney, about the realisation that this Mayo team will never win an All-Ireland. Yesterday was not their last chance to do so. The last chance came in 2017 when they led Dublin by 2 points with 6 minutes of the final game remaining, but could not close it out. And then he went on to talk about how brilliant O'Callaghan is. He's a player with the ability to become Gaelic football's Messi, but there was a time when he wouldn't have been able to do this to Lee Keegan. The Westport man was the greatest player in a great team, as good a defender as the modern era has produced, a force of nature. He goes on to say, Dublin should be grateful to Mayo. Without their challenge, their All-Ireland victories would have had a hollow ring. The championship too would have seemed a much lesser thing without Mayo. We were lucky to have them. And he references the Brooklyn Dodgers team of the 1940s and 50s. There's that book, The Boys of Summer, about them, even though they managed 1 World Series in all those years when they were a top team and the New York Yankees cleaned up. And he said, yet it is the former, the Dodgers, who will cast the bigger shadow. In some odd way, their many near misses and tragic failures merely enhance their legend. We'll come to think of this Mayo team in the same way. They could even be the team who defined this decade for many of us. Mayo may not have been the best side of the age, but for honesty, courage and resilience, they were in a class of their own. I can tell you our love for them will still be strong after these boys of summer have gone. So, are they defined by their honesty and their strength of character, or are they defined by the fact that there's not enough good men in the team?
Well,
how can we be so diametrically opposed here? 2 people looking at the same thing.
But this is
the beauty of it.
I think, like Joe Brawley again, like he brings up the ousting of Holmes and Kennelly as managers. Now, I don't know whether Holmes and Kennelly, how good or bad managers they are. They got them pretty close, But I would imagine if and I don't really want to go too far down this wormhole, but like as a group of players, to sort of orchestrate a heave against the manager, like I imagine it's quite a stressful thing to kind of go through, and you don't do it without having you know, like you ask all the questions first. It's a last resort. So I'm not sure that's a sort of blight on their character. It might be a blight on their judgment. I don't know. But like as a group of characters, I don't know. It seems to be very, very harsh.
I can tell you one thing: they're certainly not the team that will define this decade.
No, I'd agree with you there. Dublin have to define the decade.
That's a remarkable thing to say.
It's the rivalry that defines the decade, but Dublin are the team that.
Yeah, Dublin have had 2 rivals in this decade, and I think the initial one is about to come back and will define possibly the next decade in the Kerry rivalry. Mayo have been I think that this piece in particular, and even the fact that we've probably started off talking about Mayo, will probably have the text lines lining up with the hungover Dublin fans who spent the night eulogising about that 10-minute period that was possibly the greatest piece of sport that I've ever seen.
In off the ball's defence, what more can we do? We've got 2 dubs in here. And you may remember I did say, where do you want to start?
Absolutely, no, I'm not. Somehow Mayo sucked they're a bit like Liverpool City, and it's the same kind of debate that happens. Liverpool sucked the oxygen out of the room, and City fans are left wondering why isn't anyone talking about their great team.
Yeah.
But I mean, I kind of, from a media point of view, I completely understand it, because I've read all the reports and stuff, and no one has managed to sum up the magnificence of that 10 minutes, because it's almost impossible. I mean, the word awesome comes to mind, but really that word it's just not strong enough, and I don't know what the word will be. I mean, I've never seen, very rarely, maybe when Kilkenny blew Waterford out of the All-Ireland, or the Water in that All-Ireland final, I've never seen a period of dominance like it. It was just stunning to watch. And you just wonder how a team can get to that level, can get so much better than a team that dominated them, and also how Mayo wilted. I mean, there is moral or mental fortitude is a different thing to character, and you wonder what happened in that. Whatever about I know Charlie Redmond is talking about what did Jim Gavin say at halftime, but what did Mayo do at halftime? Because they were a different team as well.
Yeah, I think, not to harp on too much about Mayo, but we have to put a small bit of sort of context around the Dublin thing. Mayo after half-time made a lot of mistakes. They had whatever about Dublin getting a press on your kick out, scoring goals. The thing that really kills a team for energy is your wides. And Mayo had 4 in the space of about 5 or 6 minutes that could have given them a small bit of oxygen. And they missed them all, and that they wilted. But it was also their 7th game in 8 weeks. And even the team selection, Dermot O'Connor wasn't fit enough for the bench in Castlebar last Saturday, and he started here. Matthew Ruan got on for 5 minutes against Donegal, and he started the game.
But he did very well in that first half.
He did, but
really well.
I know, but what I'm saying is that they struck it as a bit of a hodgepodge. They were kind of patched together to get onto the pitch. But I don't think there's a team that we've ever seen that would have lived with Dublin for that 10 minutes. I watched it again this morning.
In the stadium, it felt like the quickest 10 minutes of football I'd ever seen.
It was just.
You would just, from a Mayo point of view, look, I've got kind of Mayo allegiances. You just wanted someone to go down.
Yeah. Take the sting.
Stop this. Don't take another kick out. Stop it.
Yeah.
And they dominated it, and
it was almost like they couldn't either. They were almost caught up in this,
the rhythm of it.
Just this atmosphere of whatever Dublin creates.
Had a pretty poor first half, and he was ridiculous in the second half. He caught one mark where he got up over 3 Mayo players and caught it cleanly as well.
Yeah.
And for a guy. If when they come to review this decade, I don't think there's any doubt that Stephen Cluxon will go down as the most influential Dublin footballer, and I don't think there's any doubt that Dermot Connolly will go down as the most talented Dublin footballer.
Yeah.
But for somebody who combines the two, I think Brian Fenton is probably that man, because his skill level is at an incredible level. And I don't know, I didn't see much of Jack O'Shea. I saw a lot of Darragh O'Shea. I didn't see any of Mick O'Connell. Didn't see much of Brian Mullins other than highlights. But I can't imagine there's ever been a midfielder that's quite as good as Brian
he won
Fenton.
2. He won a brilliant one, and found Mannion. Mannion was way out on the left-hand side, and I was on the opposite side of the pitch watching, and he just kicked it over. And already at that point, that was to go 4 points clear. It felt over. This thing's done.
He even kicked it free into Conor O'Callaghan for the goal.
That was off his catch. Yeah.
I think probably one thing he does do is how devastatingly quick it all was. The Tomás O'Shea took a toilet break after they went off air and went down to the studio, and he came back and Dublin had scored 1-2.
Well, it's been talked about as this unbelievable 12 minutes. I make it was a 7-minute thing and the game was over.
Second goal.
It was 1-5 without reply in 7 minutes, so they led by 6 points.
From 2 down to 6.
I know, you could see in Mayo's heads were gone.
In the context of a half where everything had gone Mayo's way and they'd managed 8 points, a 6-point deficit against this Dublin team with all those games in Mayo's legs.
I'm looking forward to tomorrow's papers and the day after, when there's a bit more time to kind of ruminate over what exactly happened. I think the toss was key. The hill was wild. The weather, I was down.
Dublin won the toss.
Dublin won the toss and chose to play into the hill in the first half, which is unlike them. And I was down that end in the upper Cusick, and it was really, you could feel the wind and even a bit of rain coming up, even though it was right at the top. And it was really hard to shoot in that end, I think. And Mayo were putting over points that Dublin weren't even trying in the first half. And it was almost like they knew that in that 5 minutes they would suddenly be able to take shots that they weren't able to have.
I don't know whether it's a big thing, but just on that, I think in every championship victory that Dublin have had over Mayo this year, they shot into the canal end in the second half.
Really?
Yeah. You go back through the 13 final, 16 replay, 17 final, 15 replay, yeah.
It was a curious wind. Like, a crucial moment was, so Dean Rock gets the point straight off the throw in the free, and then Henley goes kind of halfway line with his kick out. Colin Boyle wins the ball, gives it to Carr, and it works it up to Durkin, and that shot drops short.
That's the one that came off the bar.
Yeah. And they worked, that's where the goal came from.
Yeah.
And even then they're ahead by 2 points and you're thinking this is big trouble.
Yeah.
The wind was curious, it was blustery. I genuinely looked at the Cusick stand and all the flags to the left towards the hill were blown towards the hill, and there was a bunch of flags somehow blown towards the canal end, closer to the canal end. It was a really strange...
It was really odd,
It swirls in Croke Park anyway. We felt up in the Upper Hogan where the press box is in Croke Park, like we felt the wind, and sometimes you look down and the flag is actually going in the other direction.
Yeah.
So I don't know how big the wind plays in Croke Park, but Dublin definitely took advantage of it in the second half. Like Conor McKeon, as a display in ball winning, it was incredible. It was awesome, particularly given the man that he was on. But you have to look at how Dublin managed to open up that pocket of space in front of him. They obviously engaged Colin Boyle and tried to bring him out, because Boyle had a very good first half yesterday, and he's actually had quite a good summer as Mayo's designated sweeper. But
you know, when Brawley writes here they'll be working on James Horne's resignation letter, which I don't believe for a second. It's just kind of a glib comment. Tactically they had nothing, strategically they had nothing, he says, in Mayo. I thought in the first half the Mayo plan was exceptional. You'd have to say all of their matchups went to plan.
Yeah.
Pretty much all of their matchups went to plan, and just this possession-based game. Dublin got so frustrated in that first half.
Did they need to strike more? Like I know it's
you can't say tactically
Monday morning quarterbacking, but
you can't say tactically they had nothing.
No, they got
strategically they
defensively
had
they got it right and they hit on the break. But 2 point lead was on reflection was never going to be enough, especially if the conditions were more favourable down that end.
They're tackling,
but no, that's over the top. I mean, like James Horne's clearly a good manager. You know, they don't get to where they are at this stage. You know, they're a top 4 in the country team who held Dublin to 2 points and then got blitzed by one of the, just this incredible piece of play. Yeah. I do think they possibly didn't react on the line enough to what was happening. Again, as you say, someone go down, just get someone on. Someone lose a contact. You know, do something. Just check the momentum.
The other thing is, like, when a team has that press up, breaks in play nearly help that, because they can they can get set, you know, and you can see how tight Dublin were to it. Like, the thing about Henley, I watched them against Donegal and Castlebar. His kickouts were deliberately slow because he has such a long kick that he waited for Donegal to set up their press then went over the top. And they tried to do that, but Dublin's press was just a little bit further out. And the other thing was, like, I looked again this morning, like, Dublin kind of nearly give you an option, and then when you're about to strike the ball, James McCarthy turns and sprints towards his man. So they suck you in like that. And
it's Mayo's flaws that make them so this romantic story. But I mean, if they hadn't been chopping and changing their goalkeeper for the last 4 or 5 years, they probably would have a better kick-out strategy. And if they hadn't lost in Connacht to a team they should have beaten, they wouldn't be tired.
But that's the big thing.
That's a fair.
Like, that's where you're, like, you know, that's where you can go. I think that's where you go when you're going after them, because if they ran out of steam, well, that's because they played too many matches. That's their own fault.
They're doing the same thing. Like, I think this is their 9th game this year. They played 10 in 2017. They played 9 in 2016. Like, you just have to win Connacht.
And they used to blitz teams in Connacht the way Dublin blitz teams in Leinster. Like, for a couple of years under Horan, they were just... Connacht was right off.
It makes them thrilling to watch, but it has to be said, it's a massive failing of Mayo that they seem to pitch up at whatever level they're playing against.
Yeah.
Pat Spillane says 2-6 without a reply was awesome. Some of the best football I have ever seen in Croke Park, says Pat Spillane. He does point out Dublin had 37 attacks, which was just 3 more than Mayo. They had 26 shots compared to 24 for Mayo. Not a big difference, but that's where the Dubs scoring efficiency separated the sides. Jim Gavin's men scored from 17 of their shots, so they had a return of 65%. Mayo's returned 46%.
Yeah, there's an awful lot made this year about where Dublin take their shots from, you know, ideally that D in front of the goal. But actually, if you look at some of the points that Paul Mannion kicked yesterday, like, they were, like...
Not percentage shots.
No, like, his ball striking off his left foot has gone...
To be fair, Mayo had 1 wide in the first half. Second half, they were almost going for goals 10 minutes in to that second half, so they were just forced.
Which again, maybe, you know, get the scoreboard ticking over. It's a long half. There is time. Once Dublin went
feel like
that
that,
initial,
though.
but they're mature footballers who've been out there before. They had time on their side, and Dublin played in that burst. They didn't really sustain it. Like, they were still very good in the second half, but once that initial wave came, they knocked them out.
Mark O'Shea says, forget about 5 in a row. He's thinking it's going to be 7 or 8 for Dublin.
It potentially could be, but I mean, they haven't done 5 yet. And they're still at the same level of the...
Yera.
Well, they're obviously strong favourites to win, and everyone expects them to. But, Kerry were strong favourites to win in 82 or whatever it was, and when the Derby goal went in.
This feels a bit different, though, doesn't it?
I don't know. Yeah, well, I don't know. See, I wasn't born, so
even
I don't know.
Kilkenny in 2010, they went into 2010 having had a great battle with Tipperary in 2009, so there was the possibility, you know what I mean? Whereas Dublin, won pulling up last year's All-Ireland. They've blitzed every team in the country this year. I think Dublin would be the best team in the country for the next 2 or 3 years. But that's not to say they're going to win every All-Ireland. You only have to be caught once.
Yeah.
But at the moment, the thing that's most impressive is the fact that it's Conn and Fenton and Mannion and Brian Howard, ridiculous pirouetting out of trouble. That it's the guys who are 24, 25 that are now the leaders of the team.
This isn't getting Henry Shefflin back with a cruciate injury to try and get over the line.
I think as Mark O'Shea says, if Mayo had planned, if James Horan had been told before the game, if McCaffrey, Kilkenny and Fenton would all be kept quiet, then he would have thought he had a reasonable chance of winning the game. But it's just others step up in that absence. That's the greatness of this team, because you'll keep all those lads you mentioned quiet in the final, and McCaffrey will go on a 60-metre solo run and play 1-2 and score a goal.
The other thing as well is, I know from talking to, I think it was JJ Delaney earlier in the year, he said Kilkenny got totally caught up in the hype. It was impossible not to. Everybody wanted to talk to you about it. There was 10,000 people at training the night that Henry completed the train session. But I'm not sure that people in Dublin, I'm not sure that it's going to sort of take on. Maybe the week leading up to it will be an extra strain of excitement, but these players have seen everything at this stage. And there's no player going into their first All-Ireland final. There's no players who are sort of hobbling into the final carrying an injury. They look to be in the whole of their health. That was possibly their greatest ever display yesterday. So, we haven't seen the other semi-final, but it would take something incredibly unexpected this afternoon to change the storyline leading into the final. And finally, Conor, did James Horan give any indication about his future? No, the way he spoke was talking about next year. So that's a good enough indication. Yeah, and I think he probably knew coming in that, I thought Mayo had a really good bench going into the game yesterday. I was looking at the officially named team now. It changed a bit obviously because Ruan and Dermot O'Connor were promoted to the starting 15, but they still had Keith Higgins and Andy Moore and Tom Parsons. What a story that is. I didn't think we'd ever see Tom Parsons play football again. But they had a really good bench going into the game yesterday. And I thought going into the match that was a big thing, because if you remember the 17 final, the only question mark over the Mayo team was whether Dermot O'Connor or Paddy Durcan would start. And after that, it was kind of like your stereotypical bench. Quality drops. Whereas yesterday, I thought they had big options. But the problem was the first 15 couldn't hold Dublin long enough that when those players came on, they could have the desired effect. Like Andy Moran came on and Mick Fitzsimons beat him to every single ball, but at that stage, how was Andy Moran going to do it? So that's your GA. You won't be short of it regardless of which paper you buy. We're here at Ruaidhri O'Connor and Conor McKeon looking through the Sunday papers. We'll be over to St James's Park for 2 o'clock kickoff. We'll continue the papers here for a few minutes after 2 on all our social channels. The rugby yesterday, Ruaidhri O'Connor had that strange experience of going from the Aviva Stadium to Croke Park. You were a bit shaken coming from the very calm. I was in Daddyman Park on Friday night when Bows came from 2-0 down to beat Shelbourne in 5 minutes, with 3 goals in 5 minutes, which was pretty raucous. And then the Aviva was kind of a weird meat in a sandwich between 2 pretty epic sporting encounters. The Aviva was a chance for you to just for everyone to relax. It was inevitable. It was just exactly as you expect of these games. They're not very good to watch. There's not a great crowd at them. The crowd that's there, they're not particularly engaged because they don't really know what they're watching, and it's kind of there's a lot of young people there because the tickets are more accessible than they are for the normal games, which is a good thing, I suppose. Peter O'Reilly had a good point about after Ireland went 19-10 ahead. He said from there it was a largely featureless stuff, punctuated only by substitutions. He described it as a half-baked affair before a half-empty stadium. And I think once Carberry went off, all that matters really is that Joey Carberry played brilliantly, was the real bright spark in the whole thing, and then went over on his ankle while making a tackle, and is now
you would have to say a doubt for the World Cup. He hasn't fractured anything. Joe Schmidt gave an update afterwards, but he is going for scans, and often with ankles, ligaments can be just as tricky as anything else.
I did my ligaments years ago badly, and the doctor said you would have been better off fracturing the ankle than doing what you did, so it can be messy.
Yeah, exactly. So there was not, these games are effectively meaningless except for the people playing in them, and all you want to do is avoid injuries to players that really have a chance, and Carberry looked like he had more than a chance based on that.
I was going to say, in what way did he play brilliantly, Rory?
What I liked about it was, I thought Ireland, for all, like Eddie Sullivan and Ortiz said, they were abysmal. I thought it was very much too strong. I thought, a little, it was just what it was, but I thought when Ireland were good, they were really good at executing in 22. They were really slick, and I thought what Carberry was doing was almost like that Owen Farrell tactic that he does with Saracens, of waiting for his moment, of kind of hiding behind the pack and then suddenly calling for it and getting the backline moving in that really tight space where Ireland have been really bad. So I thought he was really good at that. His kicking game was excellent. He ran the show. He defended well. Just did everything right. He just advertised himself as a viable World Cup option. He was really, really good.
Stuart Barnes, by the way, is writing about New Zealand. Wake-up call for the All Blacks. I think this is a really good match report, because he's nailing his colours to the mast. Yeah. Australia 47, New Zealand 26. The conclusion is, by the way, New Zealand will not win the World Cup, and there's not even need for an exclamation mark, he writes, as in, this is no surprise. New Zealand will not win the World Cup. He goes through all the reasons why they won't win a World Cup. This was a record-breaking defeat for them yesterday against Australia. Yeah, I mean, there was a red card involved, as there has been with one of New Zealand's other big defeats in this era, which was the Sonny Bill Williams red card in the second test against the Lions. I didn't see the game. I've just seen a few highlights on the red card decision, which is causing a controversy in itself, and has probably led, started off what's going to be a big discussion around head injuries and tackles and what merits a tackle over the next couple of months, which is something that we could all do without, because player welfare is key, and it was a red card to me. But on the back of a pretty poor performance away to Argentina, where they got over the line, a draw against South Africa last week, and then the record defeat to Australia away from home, it's not what you like. No, there's no dressing this up as good preparation for a World Cup. It's pretty Steve Hansen will be worried, no doubt about it. They do have a return fixture, Bledisloe against Australia, that gives them a chance for redemption and to build a bit of momentum. Yeah. But I don't know if you saw Sonny Bill Williams playing like ITM Cup, like provincial rugby, with an Irish guy called Conor O'Donnell on Saturday. He wasn't anywhere near this. I mean, you'd expect him to be a key player for them at the World Cup, and he's not. He might not even make the plane. They're still scratching around a little bit. But then Eddie Jones was quoted in the Mail on Sunday saying, he asked what he was doing a presser yesterday because they're playing today, and he goes, "What was the score in the game?" And they gave him the score, and it's like, it's a warm up, mate. It's a warm up. This doesn't matter. Nothing. His point is that nothing that happens now will matter in a few weeks' time. Stuart Barnes says, where in New Zealand? He says the answer is a place they haven't been for a very long time, at least 2 World Cup campaigns. He said, even before this defeat in Western Australia, I had a list of reasons why this will not be New Zealand's year. The 2011-2015 sides were very settled. This side is not. Yeah. Talks about midfield, Man Onu and Conrad Smith for years kept a grip on things, whereas they've had no combinations that compare to that. He said in the back row there was Kino McCaw and Kieran Reid for a long time, the best 6, 7, 8 in the world. Kino and McCaw gone. He says Reid might just have started his descent too early. And then of the out-half situation, Bowden Barrett and Richie Mo'unga. He says Barrett's the most thrilling attacking player on the planet, but he cannot kick the pressure goals like Carter. And he says New Zealand have resorted to a more typical approach to point scoring, away from the almost revolutionary running game of 16 to 18. He says in the process, the All Black midfield is imploded. Barrett is wasted at 15. He says Mo'unga is a class or 3 inferior at fly half. All of this so close to Japan. Hansen selected 2 sevens to start against Australia, saying he wanted to get his best players in the field, but Barnes argues the balance that carried them to the past 2 World Cups has either been forgotten or ditched. No, New Zealand will not win the World Cup. End of. It's fairly emphatic. He's nailing the colours of the mast. Sure and it's not a great paper for if you're a New Zealander this morning, because down below he's having a little bit of a go at the English and Wales for having journeymen Kiwis in their team, and kind of that there's because they're playing against each other, there's Hadley Parks, and Eddie Jones has given the first cap to a 32-year-old from Canterbury called Willie Hines, which is very late in the day, and he's given him the vice captaincy as well, which is an interesting one. But yeah, like the All Blacks vulnerability makes the World Cup more interesting. So they might still win it. I mean, Stuart Barnes could well be wrong. This could all turn out to be a master plan, that they made all these changes and lost their games when they needed to. But right now, a little like Ireland, that
form dip has undermined the confidence in them. You know, these were the top 2 teams at the end of 2018, and Ireland took the All Blacks down. It's opening it up, and it's the box that looks unbelievable. They hammered Argentina in Salta last night to win the Rugby Championship.
Either way, our draw looks increasingly bad.
Yeah. You know, we were talking about the other night. Like it looks increasingly bad, but it is what it is. You got it's a World Cup.
Don't give me it is what it is. Will you snap out of that talk?
But there's no way of winning a World Cup without taking down one of these teams.
No,
and the semi-final should not be Ireland's target. The semi-final in itself is not it's an achievement because they've never done it before.
Yeah.
But really, this era with this coach should be looking beyond that. So, and the Springboks, for all that they've improved, they're not that good. They're not the All Blacks of 2011 and 2015.
Yeah.
They are beatable as well. They just look really good right now.
So that's New Zealand and the Springboks written off in one morning.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And England, they will see England written off later on today. But the thing is, it's very unlike the Gaelic Football Championship this year. There are 7 or 8 teams who could all beat each other on the day. There is no Dublin, which there has. The All Blacks were that much better than everyone else in the last 2 tournaments, and that's going to make it interesting.
Conor, you have a piece by Marie Crone in front of you there?
Yeah, it's interesting. The 2020 campaign was promoted yesterday in Croke Park, and it's obviously been a really, really prominent campaign. I have to say, it crept up on me unawares, and then when I became aware of it, I became very, very aware of it, because it's been very, very active. They've been very, very proactive and very good. But Marie makes the point here. She's talking about interviewing Lindsay Peat when Lindsay Peat was still a Dublin footballer. And then talks about her transition to being an Irish rugby player. But then Marie goes on to describe, and I'll quote the piece here, as she became more at ease with herself, she revealed the person away from the pitch, openly speaking about her struggle to deal with her sexuality, how her life was affected by the denial she lived with, how she found happiness when she met her wife, and the joy she felt when she became a mother. And then she goes on to talk about Sene Naupu as well, and sharing her battle with an eating disorder, and how she shared her journey from her lowest point in hospital to be able to pull on an Ireland jersey and wear it with pride. And I suppose the paragraph that kind of sums it all up is towards the end, when Marie writes, "It's impossible not to think about what would have happened if Pete's sporting career had begun a decade earlier. Would her story ever have been heard?" And it's a really good point, because the 2020 campaign, for all the increased media coverage and all the increased participation and spectators and standard of women's sport in this country across the board, I think the most potent weapon you can ever have, if you're trying to increase the scope of a sport, or in this, a number of sports in a particular gender, is identifiable heroes. And I think people are able to identify with people who show the same vulnerabilities or demonstrate having the same problems as them. I remember watching the Herald Gael that they did on Aisling Thompson, and she talked about her battle with depression and how camogie fitted in with her life. And same when they made the documentary Blue Sisters about the Dublin ladies team that won the All-Ireland. And Nicole Owens talked about her struggles with anxiety and depression, which were based on her struggles with her sexuality. And I remember thinking, there's such a positive message for young girls who play sport, where the drop-off rates are huge. And because people deal with so much angst now and anxiety, that the sport in your life is probably the first thing you sacrifice when you can't deal with it. But here was Nicole Owens, and the football and being part of a team kind of helped her through. And I think that's probably the tone of Marie's piece, and I'd really agree with it as well, is that for sport to continue, you can talk about media coverage, you can talk about the standard of the sport, but if you have these identifiable heroes who show vulnerabilities in their own life, I think it's a very, very potent weapon.
There's a gap in the market there as well, I think, because media access in men's sport has been tightened up to such a degree. There's very few feature interviews with current players, and even the Dublin team, I think one thing that you could possibly hold against them is that we don't really know them that well, because media access is so tight. The Irish rugby team, they talk a lot, but we don't probably get as many sit-down interviews and stuff as we used to. Whereas now, I think it's much easier to get access to women's sports people, because they're crying out for the coverage and they want the coverage, and they have interesting stories to tell. They probably are more likely to work a normal job. Certainly in rugby, they've had a life apart from, they didn't go to St Michael's and go into the academy and then go on to play for Ireland. They've done other things with their lives. They've come through real life problems, and the best feature interview I've seen in today's paper is with a man who retired in 1994, and Plunk O'Donoghue, the former Tyrone footballer. He's got some good yarns, stuff that you just wouldn't hear from a current footballer. Maybe we'll be hearing from Brian Fenton in 2042 as Dublin go for 35 in a row, and we find out what was going on after the games. What did Jim Gavin say at half time? You know, he talked about
up against the wall.
He just talked about esprit de corps. Yeah, like that is a flaw. Even though I love hearing these old stories, and Duncan Donny was actually someone I have a vivid memory of from when I was 3 or 4. I just had I took to that Tyrone team in '86 that got to the All-Ireland final. But I think there is, if like this today is very much, today's papers are very much like the All-Ireland semi-finals are on. The Irish rugby team, men's rugby team were playing, and the Premier League started. It's very male, and understandably so, because that's where the sports market is. But if you have a good story to tell, maybe this is the weekend to get in because there's not enough space, because there is finite. But like, there's, apart from the reaction stuff to yesterday and the previous stuff, there's very little actual human interest in there, which is what people gravitate towards.
I think a good story is a good story. I remember when AIG did a little group of videos about Dublin players in camogie and football and ladies football and hurling. They did a really good one on Noelle Healy, and she was talked about how she combined her life as an anaesthesiologist with life as a footballer. And obviously there's weird hours and, you know, bunking overnight. And I think she went on to be Footballer of the Year that year, you know. And I remember thinking, like, that's a brilliant story. Like, if you're even if you're not a young girl who's deciding whether to give up football because your college course is getting on top of you, even if you're just interested in what makes these people tick, those stories, I don't think you can tell enough of them, and I think people gravitate towards them very, very naturally. Yeah, it's true. We are going to take a short break here if you're listening on the wireless, and we'll be back with Stephen Doyle and Pat Nevin at St James's Park. We'll have commentary Newcastle against Arsenal here on the paper review and all our social channels. We're going to continue for the next couple of minutes going through the last few stories. We've had the 69th failed test from London 2012, and in a moment we're going to talk about On Hand, who it seems the FAI have welcomed back with open arms. Noel Mooney's been on to him. So we're going to continue that on all our social channels if you want to stay with us. Equally, if Newcastle against Arsenal is floating your boat, then stay tuned, because on the far side of this ad break, Stephen Doyle and Pat Nevin are on the way. Now, by the magic of technology, we can just continue straight away, which is beautiful.
Could I just give you 2 little stories from this Plug Down?
Yeah, please. That was one thing I didn't get around to.
And it goes back. It's Dermot Crowe, and it's really good. And it goes back, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through it because we're trying to get through everything. But it goes back to what I said about access, and no one likes hearing journalists give out about access. But he's talking about in the lead up to the '86 All Ireland final. Paddy Downey from the Irish Times came up to Tyrone, and seems to have interviewed both him and his dad. And his dad and Paddy Downey basically just went and drank whiskey for the night, just all night. So you know the idea of going off to before the All Ireland final, heading down to Tyrone, it's very, very different. But the better one is that he was on. You know, he never won an All Ireland because Tyrone didn't get over the line that day in '86 and was gone by the time they made the breakthrough. He finished up the year before they got to the final against Dublin. But he went on the Aussie Rules Tour, the International Rules Tour, and Kevin Heffernan was the manager, and he played with all the Meath greats and those teams. And he said Mick Lyons and Paulie Lyons, them boys were good crack. We all got to knock about together, but they got to know who was spying. So someone was telling Heffernan when they were out. It was Padder O'Brien, a journalist with the Irish Press. He was reporting about the lads coming in. So we got him this night. We had the clothes all on, and we threw him into the swimming pool. That was the end of that. Great little yarns, like, and that's kind of stuff that you're obviously not going to get them out of current players anyway. Yeah. But as we say, we look forward to hearing Brian Howard and Brian Fenton tell those stories in 30 years' time.
It will be one of the few benefits of us all getting older when we see interviews with Brian Fenton in 20 years. We'll be like, oh yeah, this is really important.
Still hasn't lost a match.
Yeah. We'll be into it. The On Hand thing is interesting. This is Paul Rowan. I haven't seen this anywhere else. So it seems that the FAI, after 6-7 years of ignoring On Hand, really have made an approach to try and put things to bed. On Hand, by his own admission, would have been pretty bitter about the whole thing. So basically, for years, On Hand was involved with the FAI in various ways. Certainly, latterly, up until his dismissal, he was involved in brokering deals for Irish players going over to the UK and securing money for clubs back here, and also giving the players advice going over. So he was dismissed from that role. Hand won his unfair dismissal case in front of the Rights Commissioner, but then he was defeated in the Labour Court when the FAI appealed in 2013. Around the same time, his RTE work dried up by coincidence, he says. I'm sure RTE will argue that it certainly was by coincidence. And it was at this point that Hand had to sell his retirement home because he was facing legal bills of more than €30,000. The fallout didn't end there, writes Paul Rowan. Hand's complimentary match tickets. When you think of this guy managed the country and played Hand's complimentary match tickets were taken away from him. He says, at the time, I thought that was very petty. Then a good friend at the FAI rang me and said, Owen, what the hell did you do? You are now persona non grata with the FAI and not to be assisted in anything. I was being airbrushed out of Irish soccer and that hurt. There was also apparently an interview in a matchday programme on the Irish Heroes, and it was meant to feature Hand's performance against France in the 1972 World Cup qualifier where he was brilliant. That ended up being spiked and Hand was left with only an apologetic phone call from the editor for his troubles. Fast forward to 2019, Noel Mooney has called him. The call came out of the blue, it was great. Noel said, I was on his list of people and was treated shockingly. They met in a Dublin hotel. Mooney expressed his regret at Hand's treatment, asked how he could make amends. Hand mentioned payment of a year's salary of €65,000 and recompense for his legal bills. That didn't happen.
Unsurprisingly.
Yes, it was a hell of a pitch. It was worth a try, I suppose. But he settled for a lot less. His tickets, though, have been restored, and there is also the promise of some matchday work, hospitality, that kind of thing. And it seems Noel Mooney at least is trying to put that thing to bed. So I guess that's an insight into how the FAI were treating people and now what they're trying to do now.
It's an insight into the culture of fear that existed in the organisation and the way things are run. And he's own hand. I'm sure he wouldn't like to be portrayed as a victim, but like he's kind of he's a very much a personification of the kind of people who were squeezed out during the Delaney years, and it's terrible. I mean, even if you think about the role that he had, if you just strip away his legacy or his legendary status and the fact he was a manager and all that sort of stuff, the role he had was so important in terms of bringing, helping people over in England and bringing people home. And the vulnerability that those young players had and the way he was able to help them, and the fact that they never replaced him. I mean, they split it into several different roles, but the funding continued for 3 years afterwards from the government until they eventually pulled it. And he couldn't believe it because he said that he had been told there was no money there to keep him on. It's probably a sign of his decency that he didn't pursue him for what he felt he was owed, that he took what was given to him, which was a bit piecemeal,
I'd still look at this whole thing and, not be overly cynical, but like it's an easy PR victory for Noel Mooney and the FAI now.
Absolutely.
Where were all these people when On Hand was being treated dismally for all those years?
Yeah.
I think without knowing too much about the story, I think any PR victory for the FAI is a very necessary one at the moment.
Well, that's true. And Hand, by the way, says he hasn't been back at the Aviva for years. He's going to go to the Hungary game next month. He says, I haven't been back in the Aviva Stadium for years because I never wanted to bump into Delaney for fear of what I might do or say. He never kicked a ball straight in his life, but he had so much power over those who dedicated their lives to the game. He readily admitted to being bitter, writes Rowan. Now at least Hand can move on. It's a good piece. Didn't see that anywhere else.
Yeah, no. I mean, Owen has been very accessible over the years. I mean, I've spoken to him and he was on here, I think, a couple of days after everything broke.
Yeah, and even that interview didn't go the way we planned. That became more about him and Delaney. We wanted to talk about how Irish football was being managed.
Yeah.
And even, in fairness, understandably, even he wasn't ready to almost have that conversation. He wanted to talk about his own situation because he was so angry about it, and it was a strange kind of piece for the week that was in it. But it's understandable.
Yeah. Absolutely, and it should never. It's another example of what can happen if people take their eye off the ball now and switch off the FAI story, because this cannot be allowed to happen again. No organisation should be allowed to be run as a fiefdom in the same way, so that personal grudges are allowed to manifest in this way, and that good people like On Hand are treated in this way. I mean, it's just terrible.
Yeah.
There's a piece here, Joe. Sorry, it's in the Sunday Times, and it's Dennis Walsh, and it's about. Just in the lead up to next Sunday's All-Ireland hurling final. It's about Liam Sheedy and Declan Kelly. Declan Kelly being the CEO of Teneo, who came back in as sponsors of Tipperary this year. They're both from Port Row and they were both of the same vintage. They played hurling together underage. Right. But it's charting Declan Kelly's sort of business life and then coming back into managing to sponsoring Tipperary this year. And just... It's very, very interesting. Like, if people don't know, Declan Kelly, very successful businessman from Port Row, where Liam Sheedy's from. But he started off, I didn't realise this, he started off, he spent his early working life as a reporter on local papers in Tipperary, so there's hope for us all. He moved on to the Cork Examiner, as it was called then. This is a nice paragraph now, I'm just getting off the point for a second, but it says, from time to time Kelly's column landed the Examiner in bad odour with the Cork County Board, who weren't slow to take issue. one memorable column calling for Canon Michael O'Brien to be removed as Cork hurling manager in the early 1990s ran under the pithy headline, Fire the Cannon. In the offices of the County Board, there were no marks awarded for cute wordplay. But it goes on to chart the success of the company.
Right.
And like, just to get the scale of it, because there's a lot of figures in it, but in the years since then, Teneo has continued to flourish, employing about 800 people now in 12 different countries. In June, they sold a majority stake to a private equity group for more than $350 million, which, according to the Wall Street Journal, put the company's worth at about $725 million.
It's a PR company.
Yeah. So that's Declan Kelly. But the point I'm getting around to here is the relationship between Kelly and Sheedy ran far deeper than that. And once Sheedy came back in to manage Tipperary, he either invited or asked or told Declan Kelly to get involved in sponsorship. But the sponsorship, they haven't really used it to kind of further the company, you know, so it's more of a benefactor thing.
Right.
And
it's on the jerseys, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's all along their presence has been understated. In April, a Mansion House dinner for Tipperary surviving All-Ireland winning captains raised between 80,000 and 100,000 euro for the team, but it was a closed affair not designed to generate publicity. Now, this isn't the point that Dennis makes in the piece, but it is a thing that, you know, at the end of the year when we see the published accounts from county boards as to how much money was spent on inter-county teams, that's not the full figure, because in a lot of cases like this, there's an outside benefactor or investor putting money into the team. And I think for an inter-county team, there's no end to the amount of money that you can actually spend on it, that you can invest in it. But a lot of the teams, and it's only anecdotal stories that I'm told, but I think a lot of the teams that are competing this weekend and next weekend and in the latter stages of the All-Irelands all have huge money invested in them, either by wealthy benefactors or by sponsors that you don't fully see, like what they do.
Don't Kerry and Mayo in particular raise huge amounts when they go to the States?
Yeah, and that's the thing. And, you know, people talk about inequality because of like the size of a sponsorship deal, but like the ability to generate that sort of money, or the sort of money that Mayo or Kerry, I know Meath did it pretty successfully recently as well,
right.
That sort of money abroad, that's probably the thing that smaller counties aren't going to be able to compete with, because unless you have some guy who left the local town and went off to America and established a company that's worth $725 million, people aren't inclined to just throw money blindly at their county crest.
And there's different models of it as well, because Donaghy talks about being a member of Club Tyrone and putting money in that way, and, you know, people give what they have or what they can to be part of the club, the vehicle that funds the Garbahi operation and everything that's there as well. So
even
it's showing a bit of innovation in the counties maybe that don't have the benefactor. There are ways of doing it to try and keep up.
Even I was doing a piece for a magazine that we're bringing out closer to the All-Ireland final, and the piece is about how Pat Gilroy turned Dublin around. And like part of it was that Dublin didn't have a training base. They trained in St David's in Artane, like a secondary school pitch, and Pat built what's now known as the Bunker in St Clair's and DCU, and he just engaged with corporate sponsors. But all of a sudden the players, rather than sitting out in their cars for 20 minutes if they were early for training, had a meeting room where it's not the lap of luxury or state of the art.
Yeah, I've been there,
But you know, again, like, not every county has a manager who's Pat Gilroy, who has those sort of business contacts that you can generate the funds. But, like, you know, I think there's the point of even though Dennis doesn't raise it in the piece, I think, like, you know, those sort of benefactors will make a huge difference to whether a county goes on and wins in All-Ireland or not.
Which doesn't sit well with me, I must say. There's a certain randomness to all that, which isn't quite right. Like, the GAA almost need to get on top of it and see what exactly is going into places, who needs funding for training facilities, because it can't just be that, oh well, we've got local businessmen and good, so we're okay. Tough luck next county.
The other thing as well is, like, when people talk about maybe equalisation of sponsorship funding, like, I think the point that's missed there is that it's not practical to do that either, because, like, if you're the secretary of a county board and you're doing a deal with a company, like, you know, the deal might include, you might have to give up, you know, you might have to settle sponsors of your ladies teams, your camogie team and your ladies football team, to get them all on board because this company wants to, like, to go the extra mile. And like, why would it, like, if you're leaving counties to their own devices, I don't think it's going to be a very practical thing to do, to actually pool all the sponsorship resources and divide it equally amongst the counties, because I think what will happen then is the pot of money will dwindle, like, because they just won't have the same motivation to do it.
So your argument is, if AIG say to Dublin, well, we want at least 20 days where we get your players to do stuff for us. If Dublin feel, well, that money is being pooled, they're saying, well, we're not giving up 20 days from our players, so you can give us less money and then the pool dwindles. That's your argument?
I think so, yeah.
Maybe. Will it dwindle that much?
I don't know. But I mean, the thing about it is you either give county boards autonomy to, you either say to them, look, fundraising is your thing, getting sponsorship is your thing, or you don't.
Just the Carlo Hurler, his name escapes me, he's done a lot of good interviews recently. He was talking about how Carlo might get 50 to 100 grand sponsorship, all in, and they're not able to raise a huge amount of money. We've got to do something about that situation where it's so inequitable. Yeah, but Cody, sorry, thanks.
But could the Carlo County Board, rather than it being pulled from a central fund, could they approach 5 or 6 other county boards and do a joint sponsorship deal that brings it all up, because over the course of those 5 or 6, they'll get way more exposure. Maybe. So that it filters down that way. Is there another way of innovating, rather than merging counties as, to bring the standard up, which is one thing that's suggested along with splitting Dublin? Is there a way of pooling resources that way? Even isn't there Offaly and Kildare the same sponsor?
Yeah.
Should that be part of a wider deal that brings Meath in and a couple of other counties, so that they have the same name in their jersey, so that the sponsorship is magnified by whatever the
Kevin
is?
Say made an interesting point last year. Part of the reason Kevin seemed to leave Roscommon was that he just felt that to take the next step they would need to invest more into it. And he felt that Croke Park should cover the costs of players' training and sustenance when it comes to post-match meals and that sort of stuff. And if Croke Park were being sort of very proactive about this, I wonder, could you have a system whereby a county board signs up for a charter, and part of the charter is, because this will be to everyone's mutual benefit, and I don't want to be a journalist moaning about access, but you have a certain number of, say, 2 players that are made available the week of a match for media, and then what you're doing is you're increasing the profile of the games, you're increasing the profile of the players, and everyone gets elevated. And in return, county boards don't have to cover the cost of training and travel and all those auxiliary costs that you have to meet that are very, very expensive. And you're spending a fortune just getting players to show up to training in the first place.
I suppose the only thing is that the richer counties will then put their money into something else and bring in more S&C coaches or more dietitians, and the rich will always be richer and will always have more resources. But I suppose you're bringing the basic standard up.
There is just going to be an inherent inequality in GA.
It's representative sport as well.
The county system, everything about it, the provincial system, everything about it is just tilted in different ways.
It's the same in international football and all representative sports.
Yeah, you could argue that. Luckily enough for you two, you're from Dublin.
Indeed.
Will we ever see Dublin split in 2?
I had a conversation last night after the game with my 3 members of my family who are all Dublin fans about what would you do, and I'd be out. That's the GA for me. I just wouldn't have the interest. I wouldn't be able to choose which one. I've lived on both sides. I don't really affiliate with one or the other. I certainly couldn't cheer for the south side over the north side, and probably not vice versa. My uncle was probably would go to the south side, but he doesn't know who he'd go with, because my dad and my sister were both Northsiders.
Split families.
I think you would lose what makes, that Hill 16 yesterday was just, the hill yesterday was amazing.
It was, yeah.
And it looks great, and it's part of what makes the summer great.
Who gets to wear the navy blue?
But these are all things that would have to be worked out, and I think if Dublin's split was on the table, I think you'd have to start talking about merging counties as well, because it won't fix everything.
No, that's
and I think we'd all enjoy the first North v South Dublin All-Ireland final.
The other thing is,
within 4 or 5 years top.
The team that does beat Dublin eventually, and they will lose, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yeah.
You look at the number of players that Kerry are bringing through. Sooner or later, they will have the best panel of players in the country.
Yeah.
But who wants to be the first team to win a Leinster Championship by beating South Dublin or North Dublin in a Leinster final?
Kildare.
If you don't take the big bad wolf out of the equation, what's the...
No, I appreciate that.
What's the appeal?
I don't think anyone would like to see it come to that. That would be a real failure. And just one other quick few bits and pieces randomly, feel free to throw whatever out you want to mention. Graham Souness has written a pretty good to-the-point column on Manchester United. If I'm sitting in Manchester United's dressing room today, I'm glad Romelu Lukaku is gone. And I don't want Paul Pogba in there with me either if he's not up for the fight ahead and is keen to get away. Ultimately, his main thrust, though, is of Marcus Rashford. I'm not convinced he's ready yet. Time's still on the side, but he's not going to be a 20 goals a season player. He scored 10 and 33 last year. I'd prefer to see him playing wide for a year yet while he becomes United centre forward. Easier to see the game from out wide when you make your movements through the middle up front. Hardest place to play. He doesn't have the penalty box craft of Sergio Aguero yet, but he can learn that. It's the same with his finishing. Thinks Harry Maguire is going to make a big impact, a huge impact. City have missed a trick because Maguire will have an enormous impact at United, but that's his main thrust today. He's looking at Rashford saying he is not ready to lead Manchester United through the middle. If you're interested in that, we have that game at 4:30. And then Jack Anderson, Ina Reardon wrote about this during the week, and it's amazing really, the London 2012 games. I was at these games and there was such an amazing atmosphere in London. It's kind of a really nice memory I have, but with each passing week it becomes further tarnished. And obviously we had our suspicions at the time, but now it's just irrefutable. It's approaching being the dirtiest games ever. Certainly Ian O'Riordan made that point during the week. I'm not sure exactly what the stats are, but basically with London now, the Uzbek wrestler Artur Tamizov failed a drugs test recently, so he's become the 60th 6-0 athlete to retrospectively fail a positive or to test positive for doping since 2012. That's in addition to the 9 athletes who were caught doping during the games. So in total, London, 69 athletes, 60 retrospectively, 9 at the time have been caught doping, which is more than triple the number caught doping at the 04 Athens Olympics. I guess you can argue there must have been as many doping at Athens, they just haven't been caught. But it's all part of the situation now where sport is, in that there is a 10-year window once the Games is over, following which tests can be done on athlete samples. Once you go past 10 years, it's kind of done. And nobody first knew about this really until Andre Agassi's book Open, where he admitted taking crystal meth in 97, and he avoided a suspension saying his drink had been spiked, and WADA wanted to effectively go back and do something about this, but it turned out there was a 10-year statute of limitations. So it's been in law for some time, but it's really only now that we're more aware of it. So there's a 10-year window, and the expectation is that if you were in London 2012, you've got 2 more years until you get away with it. But it's pretty grim spectacle that 60 have tested positive. Like he says, for example, this is Jack Anderson in the Sindo. For example, the men's 94 kg weightlifting event from the 2012 Olympics shows just how little confidence remains in certain sports. All 3 medalists were disqualified for doping, as were the 4th, 6th and 7th placed finishers.
I think athletics and like a lot of the Olympic sports have suffered though in the broad scheme of sports fans because of all this.
Oh yeah,
like
definitely.
I remember being young and known who the best sprinters in the world were, or known who the best 1500 metres runners in the world were. I could tell you the finalists in the 92, the Olympics, the 100 metres final. But like, since Bolt retired, like who are they? Like, you know, like it's impossible to invest in these sports, and I just wonder whether, like, is it worth it? Like, you know, is there enough sponsorship? Is there enough incentive for athletes to dope going into it?
It's incredible the Olympics endures as it does. When you think about next summer, Tokyo will be on, and the BBC will be carrying on as if none of this ever happened.
Yeah.
In particular, I think they're just quite guilty of kind of
overlooking it. Considering the vibe they created in 2012.
Well, absolutely.
It was such a ratings winner for them. It was such a massive success.
Yeah, and it does look so good, and it is such a festival of sport. And I don't know. Do cycling and athletics take it more seriously than other sports? And are they more transparent? I mean, they don't strike me, or they haven't been over the years, but now that they've been through everything that they've been through, I mean, if all these athletes are doing these in these Olympic sports when there's not a lot of money at stake.
Yeah.
I mean, the Premier League is happening in the corner of our eye over there, just kicking off, and this unbelievable rigmarole of games over the course of a 10-month season. Yeah. Rugby World Cup's coming up soon.
How many positive tests were there at the last Rugby World Cup?
Oh, I don't think there were any.
I don't think there were any either.
But I mean, you would be very stupid to be caught at the World Cup. I would have thought if you were going to be doping, you would be doing it at a different time. But I mean, I could not say with any confidence that there's no players at the Rugby World Cup who have not taken a performance, double negative, but you know what I mean, who have not taken a performance on drug. And just the same as watching the Premier League, I cannot have any confidence. But or even the GAA Championship, I'm sure there's lads trying to get on panels and stuff who are willing to go to any means necessary, because money's not the primary motivation, although that's what's always thrown out. But these numbers, if it ever happened, if there ever was a Festina affair in one of those sports, it would be interesting because of the parochial nature and the support spaces that are there. You know, we've seen footballers fail drugs tests and be kind of, it's become an attack on clubs and things like that. But I mean, it's hard. It's going to be hard to watch Tokyo next year and not have this in the back of your mind, just like you watch the Tour de France. I always watch Tour de France because I like watching it, but I don't take it particularly seriously.
It's hard not to get sucked in though as well. Like for the stakeholders in the London Olympics, the big, BBC and the NBC and the big television companies and the sponsors, Nike and Adidas, and like, does this even matter? Like all the retrospect, because it happens and it's the event and it wins the ratings and they get the television and they break the records. Yeah. And when it's over and this comes out in drips and drabs a few years later, and we sit around saying, well, it's a disgrace and they failed X amount of doping tests, I don't think they care.
No, well, that's the point. The world didn't stop when Artur Tamizov became the 60th athlete to test positive. No. I didn't see it anywhere until I saw you
the person you kind of look at is the person who finished fourth in that one that was the first, second and third are gone, and they didn't even get up on the podium in London. They've been sent a medal in the post, and that's not really going to be, but I mean, they could be doping as well, you just don't know.
Yeah, so basically 2004 Olympics, there were 17 caught during it and 5 retrospectively. What was that, 04? So that's long gone now, the 10 years has passed there. So if you doped at Athens and you haven't been caught now,
your medal is
way.
You're safe.
Yeah, get it framed.
There is the grim spectacle of there will be many athletes counting down to midnight sometime in August in 2022.
Do you think it keeps them up at night? I don't think so.
I think it is a reasonable deterrent, genuinely. So look, 2008, 7 caught during it, 65 cents. 2012, 9 caught during it, 60 cents. I think if you doped in London 2012, and you're now 2 years away from, I can ride out the rest of my days as Olympic gold medalist. I do think it does keep you up nights. Like, your world will irreparably be damaged if they manage to look at your test and find... But, the reason for this, obviously, as you might suspect, and Jack points it out in the piece, is that doping is so far ahead of testing. So they're giving themselves this 10-year window to catch it. But it's deeply unsatisfactory for those of us who invest time watching at the time. It's a bit like VAR on a really slow scale. The goal goes in, the race happens. VAR, you have to wait for the replay. You now have to wait about 10 years to find out if that was worth watching.
Yeah. But I think, to go back to your point about sleepless nights, I just think dopers have put themselves in a... I'm sure there's some who are vulnerable and who will regret it for the rest of their lives and secretly, but I think most of them think... They justify it in their own heads. Yeah. They're at peace with it. They're living their own Instagram movie. They're the hero of their own movie, and they did nothing wrong. And if it does come out, it'll be a suspect piece of meat that they ate or something like that. Because very rarely do they put their hands up and admit it. It's always something, someone did something to them or they made a mistake. So I think they coach themselves into a position where they won't be waiting for that 2 years, and they'll be shocked if they get caught, and suddenly the world will be against them and they'll be the victim. Jack, by the way, Anderson has a legal background, so there's a picture of Lance Armstrong here. So basically all 7 of Armstrong's tour results were expunged, even though this went outside the 10-year window. And he says that this was done because of testimony and other evidence surrounding what Armstrong had done. So he says this precedent could allow the IOC to revisit the results from the Olympics of the 1970s and 1980s, where there's documented evidence from Stasi files, for example, that countries such as East Germany engaged in state-sponsored doping. So he's arguing it could go back further if they wanted to.
Yeah, but I suppose the cause celeb for all this was a Shirley Babashoff, the American swimmer who I think finished 4th in 3 Olympic finals in 76 maybe, and it was 3 East Germans that finished 1st, 2nd, 3rd. And retrospectively, I think she went then and won the final race and got the gold medal. I might be mixing this all up. But then I think she was retrospectively awarded the other medals. And she said, well, look, the medal that I cherish is the one that I actually beat them in the race.
The one that had the moment.
The medal in the post is a medal in the post.
Want to beat the Big Bad Wolf?
Any final stories then you want to mention? That's me pretty much over and out.
I think that's...
Okay.
Pretty comprehensive.
You two are going home to rewatch Dublin Mayo.
There's a bit of work to do on Ireland, Italy, to got to revisit that.
I think I'm going to tip into Croke Park to see.
Croke Park scoff at Kerry Tyrone efforts.
Well, it's funny, I remember watching Donegal and Kerry in Croke Park a few weeks ago, and everyone was delighted that we had such a really high quality. But and this isn't hindsight revision. I remember sitting there saying, they're not going to beat Dublin. Not based on that performance, and then the following week Donegal, or 2 weeks later Donegal went out.
Would Dublin fear more, Tyrone or Kerry?
I think they're beyond fear. I'd love a Dublin-Kerry final just because...
5 in a row.
I think if you're going to win the 5 in a row, it's the way to do it.
But as well as that, we've seen Dublin-Tyrone the last 2 years.
I can't get excited about Dublin-Tyrone.
And if it looks like the game it's been the last 2 years, it's not going to look good.
Bloodless.
Yeah, Dublin will systematically take them apart. But if you think, imagine David Moran going up against Brian Fenton, or Gavin White going up against Jack McCaffrey.
Yeah.
And Kerry coming with the pressure of, look, it's up to you now to stop Dublin doing this. It will make for a better lead-up, and I think it'll make for a better game. Yeah.
The majority of pundits in the papers are tipping Kerry.
Are they?
Both of us, I think it's going to be Tyrone. Yeah, I think Tyrone will have their number.
Okay. Fellas, thanks so much for coming in. Rory O'Connor and Conor McKeon.
Cheers.
Pleasure. Cheers. That's us done for the pay-per-view. Back next Sunday.
Possession we're in. Time and again he turns around and looks up here to where we are and just behind us, as if to say to the fans, this is okay, isn't it? This is fine. He looks very calm and very happy with his team so far.
Not far from where he grew up, a little place called Walker. This is just about an hour's walk from here. The corner sent in right into the middle, and it was Lascelles up there. John Joe Shelby has a shot from the outside the box, but no power in that. It's cleared away by Gendouzi. Longstaff tries to head it back in, but Willock then heads it away for Arsenal. And a bit of head tennis going on between both sides here. Matt Ritchie managed to get a foot on it. He tried to send a pass out wide for Joe Linton, but there was too much pace on it, and it's at the feet of Bern.